Hey everyone, my name is Matt Romanchik and I would like to welcome you to my humble little podcast, This Conscious Earth. I consider this to be something like the movie Waking Life, except instead of a dream, I'm in real life, walking around, just having conversations with people who I think are inspiring and interesting. I hope you're inspired by this podcast as well. Welcome to This Conscious Earth. Thanks to John Arn for that awesome opening track. You can find that and all the other music featured on this show on my YouTube and SoundCloud pages. Just search for The Conscious Vibe and you'll find all of that. If you would like to submit music, just shoot me an email at theconsciousvibe@gmail.com. So, my guest this week is Glenn Berkenkamp. I met Glenn in California. He's a cool guy. How I met him is actually a whole nother story on its own. But basically, Glenn Berkenkamp is a writer, teacher, and speaker with a passion for helping others to see and live the beauty of their true lives. He was born and raised in New Jersey and became a world-renowned fitness expert by the age of 21. At age 23, he followed an inner calling that led him to California. It was there that he began a deep journey into holistic health and well-being, the nature of reality, and the mind, body, and spirit connection. He's an accomplished screenwriter, and his first book, Mastery: Living the Highest You, is currently out now. And you can get a signed copy with free shipping of his book if you use the coupon code ConsciousVibe. Just go to his website, livingthehighestyou.com, and you'll find that. This podcast is sponsored by Apollogenesis. Apollogenesis distributes a wide array of health and nutritional supplements. If you head to their website, apollogenesis.com, just use the coupon code STAYCONSCIOUS at checkout and you'll get 10% off. So I introduce to you Glenn Berkenkamp. All right, so I'd like to start off, just introduce yourself, talk about who you are, what that means to you, whatever you find to be important to give the listener an idea of who they're hearing from.
Well, first of all, thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you.
Not only for putting this, your podcast together and with the word consciousness in it, we certainly need more of, all of us on the planet. But also thank you for the path you're walking. As we've alluded to in our conversations in the past, it's not the easiest of paths. So thank you for staying with it. I think you're planting seeds for a lot of beautiful things in the future.
Thank you for supporting it. It is good to have that reassurance occasionally, especially when you come back to an area like this and it's not as prevalent as somewhere like Northern California.
So my name is Glenn Berkenkamp. I live in Northern California. I'm first and foremost a being of service. who is here to help humanity in any way I can. Some of the ways that I find that I am able to do so is through writing, speaking, one-on-one in groups, and leading workshops. So my path has been one of awakening, one could say. It's been one of deepening awareness, of growing in consciousness, of self-examination, self-realization, and ultimately self-mastery. It's a path that you're always refining. It's a path that is always deepening. But there are certain levels and certain areas in which you reach where there's points of no return. Until one can truly know themselves, they cannot really be of service. So my path has been, like I just stated, one of self-awareness, self-mastery, and understanding my part in the larger scheme of things, the bigger picture.
You were originally drawn to California when you were very young, in your early 20s, if I believe, correct?
Yes. Even earlier on, I grew up in New Jersey, and when I was younger, I was very much into things like BMX, that's bicycle motocross, skateboarding, and things that were generally tied to Southern California. So at one point, I think when I was in about 8th or 9th grade, kids would call me California as like a nickname. It's actually, I was very involved with the sport of bodybuilding from the age of 13 to 22. So because Venice Beach is the mecca of bodybuilding, I was drawn there. So that's what ultimately got me there. But my father, when I was 16 years old, took me to California to train. So at that point in my life, from the age of 13, I had a very strong relationship to physicality and understanding the body from a pure physical sense. And of course, there's mental components to it, visualization components to it. But generally, I was living a life that dealt with the external body. How does one become stronger? How does one become bigger? So that was my main focus, was understanding how does the body work as this physical machine. And that ultimately did lead me to moving to California, which I felt was my calling from my youth.
Now, you started off as a bodybuilder, and that eventually led you down a more spiritual journey, like, you know, way of the peaceful warrior style, kind of, and which was, I mean, I know this because you've told me the story, which was a massive shift for you. For the listener, tell us how exactly that shift occurred, going from being only about the physical world, caring only about image and being kind of stuck in that, and then moving into this quest of awakening to knowing that there's something more to life and something more to you as a human being.
I think all of us have a deep yearning to know ourselves in a larger way. And I think from a very young age, whether it be through our education, our environment, we often reduce ourselves to be something smaller than our true essence. Having said that, when I moved to California, it was still very much for money and muscles. What I found, though, is that I had accomplished as much as I could. I'd become a national judge, and I was training some of the best bodybuilders in the world, and there was really nowhere I could really go from there in that sport. When I moved to California, I was also, for the first time, exposed to very wealthy people. So people that drove Ferraris. So when we talk about money and muscles, like I had a fair degree of muscles, but I didn't have millions of dollars. And I started to be around people that did have millions of dollars. And it's a bit cliche, but I saw that these people weren't generally happy. They weren't content, you could say. There was no sense of peace. So early on, I got to see, like, interestingly, where am I going with this money and muscles? And then what started to happen to me is I felt this sense of unfulfillment. And for whatever reason, I realized that fulfillment wasn't going to come from outside of me. I then decided that I was going to work on my insides as much as I had worked on my outsides. And I had no idea what that would mean. one of the first things that I looked at was the nature of thought. I started to get very into my thoughts and what they formed in the world around me. So how was my thinking informing the physical manifest world around me? And then my belief systems, the belief systems that I currently was conscious of, and then the belief systems I was born into, raised into, had experienced through life, how did they affect the present that I was living in? And I started to realize that much of what I was experiencing was based on my belief systems and my thoughts. So I started saying, well, if I change my belief systems and my thoughts, how much does that affect the world around me and the world inside me? And when I saw that taking place, I became more and more interested in this idea of there's something more here. There's something in it. I wouldn't say it was all new age at all. It was like, if you think a certain way, things happen. If you believe something, you tend to attract that to you. And so that was my early on journey inward. Having said this, I do think there's a part of us that all wants to wake up. I think there's a part in all of us that is nudging us. There's something. For me, it was honoring that calling at that point in my life. People have asked me in the past, do I regret the bodybuilding and all that? And I don't regret it at all, because one thing it did for me, among many things, was it showed me physicality. It was like a beautiful foundation that was being laid for me to then go inward. And as that happened, the muscles started to slowly melt away, and they became less interesting to me.
So it kind of started with this journey into the mind, basically, and how the mind works.
Yeah.
Now, do you think that maybe initially you carried over the sort of obsession you had with muscles?
Yeah.
You carried that same mentality over into deconstructing and analyzing and understanding the mind?
100%. I went from reading every muscle book, anatomy book, chemistry book, biochemistry book, all the way down the line that had to do with building muscles and the body, to then, okay, how does one look at thought? Who are the thought leaders? It was that same tape that ran my being. And that, interesting you bring that up, because it wasn't until years later, I think I was about 29 years old, and I was standing by a lake in Los Angeles, in a little area, and a breeze came through the woods, through the trees, and right through me. And there was nothing in me that stopped the breeze. It was just like I was at open window when it came through. And I looked at the lake, and I saw the passing ripples from the breeze on the lake still affecting it, and the sunlight on the lake. And I realized at that moment that I was peace. I felt that was kind of dissolving away from me, that part of me that has to go so deep and chase and try to discover, and that's great. When it's our passion, it's beautiful. The books basically come flying to us. Like when we open that window and we say we're ready, books will literally fall off a shelf for you. It's just going to happen. But after a while, it got to this point of just an inner stillness and a connection to what I would say is the divine in my own inner spirit, higher self.
So the belief in the power of the mind, going from that, which is a very scientific perspective, even the body, the mind, it's still like a step in one direction, but going from that to this very spiritual perspective, talking about peace and spirit, that's also a whole journey in itself. So how did that come about?
You are right. These are broad steps. And so, as you know, when you first start reading books on affirmations, on, you could say, positive outlook, there are always threads of spirituality through there. They'll often talk about great mystics that said this, or Jesus said that.
I mean, mystics were talking about the power of thought, generations before modern science even understood that stuff.
Exactly. So those seeds were there early on. A couple things happened. In my youth, through my early teens, I would say, the only time that I'd really get angry at someone is when they would talk about God. And I would say to myself, how could this person believe in God. Like, I could never get my head around how someone could buy into that. And so I bring this up because now it's really the driving force of my life, this God. This is what I care most about. But it didn't come to me because of a breakdown or bottoming out. And, it was basically a very natural thing. And of course, I was not raised with any one religion, right? So I went to Unitarian Fellowship. So I got to hear very diverse things. But I was not, when I went there, it was never something I was really drawn to, at a young age. I went there more with the family. But this calling that you're speaking about, I had experiences where I could start to feel myself as more than just a physical being. As much as the physical body is your vehicle, it's not necessarily who you are at your true core essence. It's the vehicle in which you're embodied in. So I became more and more interested in this engine that was animated the vehicle that I was in, and then became more and more interested in who made that engine, or what made that engine, and where does it come from, and so this is the mystery. So when you say, how do you get into the spirituality aspect of it, the unseen, the mystery, it was through further questions and wanting to know. And again, it's the investigative thing, but there's also this continual unfoldment of you seeing yourself as more. And when that happens, you start to see other people as more, and you start to see your connection to nature, and you start to see your connection to everything else, and all the separation starts to kind of dissolve away. And then you have to say, well, what is God in this? Or what is not God in all of that? And again, I use the word God. That's a word that works really well for me when I talk about creation and all it is and the grand intelligence. For other people, it doesn't work. Yeah. My quest into spirit came from experiencing things directly that were seeded earlier when I was looking at things like how the mind works, how thought works, what creates synchronicity, how does life work. People perish, in horrible things each day. And then there's the person that was late to work because for the first time, he left his lunch at home. And then if he would have went to work, he might have, perished, right? And so, but what made that one person, not go to work that day? My quest has been seeing into the mystery, living into the mystery, being receptive to the mystery.
So I imagine some people would hear something like you just described and still say, oh, that's still like all product of the mind, or because you were learning about these sort of things, and I've been told this kind of stuff, because I'm exposing myself, I'm learning about things like the auric field or the chakra system, that I'm using that to create a story, and they would say that, that there's too much proof that doesn't exist. So how does one tell the difference between products of the mind and actual experience that comes from something externally?
I think, first of all, a lot of what those people are saying is correct. A lot of people that are on quote-unquote a spiritual path are doing so because they've been hurt in the past, they're escaping in some ways, certain people. So there's a lot of reasons that people go, and this is not just a spiritual path, it's any path. Someone that goes into mixed martial art may have come from an abusive childhood, and this is where they channel their energy. Of course, there's no debating when you get punched in your face that's reality, right? Versus getting your chakra punched, And so, but having said that, in honoring these people that are on their path and saying these things, I think there's a couple ways to look at that. And the first is that it's no accident that one hears these sort of challenges, right? And it makes them think, okay, well, they have a point or they don't. I found that a lot of people, because I've been around this conscious movement or whatever for many years now, and I found that a lot of people don't like to challenge their beliefs that much. They just like to all of a sudden believe in chakras, and it's great, and they wear t-shirts that talk about it and stuff, but it's not really real. And the second part of your question is, well, then how does one know? How does one discern? And discernment is very, very large part. And so there's a couple of things that come into play, and one is like, what's your intent? What is the person's intent? Like, for instance, I said early on, I want to work on my insides as much as I'd worked on my outsides. I didn't say I want to learn mind control to buy a new Ferrari. I said I wanted to be able to levitate. I said I wanted to work on my insides as much as I worked on my outside. So what did I want to do? I wanted to see why I was insecure about certain areas. I wanted to see why my anger would flare up at certain points, and could I do anything to control, shape that, steer that. And so my inner journey was about how to become a better human being. It wasn't so much about how to become a more advanced spiritual master. What happens out of that is you become more and more what I would call your true self. In my book, Mastery, I talk about Michelangelo saying, how he would stare at that chunk of marble, and they'd say, what are you doing? And he said, well, I already see it. I just have to chip away at the superfluous matter because the sketch is already there. I believe the master self, the higher self, is already there too. So whether you have to believe in chakras or any things like that to be a master, I don't think that's generally the case. However, there are certain people that are drawn to those things in this lifetime. And there's people that practice energetic medicine. There's people that become incredible healers, medical intuitives. I was very, very run down. I forget what age I was, probably late 20s. Very, very run down. No one really knew what was going on with me, but I got so weak. I got blood tests and everything was fine. From a Western perspective, everything was fine. And a friend of mine said that there was this healer coming through town, and I should see the person. And I had the understanding already that to say this, my response, and I said, no, I think there's a part of me that's bringing this on, and I don't want to just go and the guy takes it away. And so my friend said, well, how about this? How about you go, and then you get potentially healed of this, and then you can figure it out, rather than wallowing in this, weakness. And I was really not doing well. So I went to see this guy, and I sat across from him. And one of the first things he said to me, Matt, was he said, do you think you could leave here feeling healthy? And I said, yeah. And he says, okay, great. So we sat across from each other, and he was just, he was, I guess if you had to label him, he was a Qigong master. This is what his label would be at the time. And I just sat with him, and I could feel sort of a transference going back and forth. And then he had me lay down, but he didn't touch me. And all of a sudden he said, okay, it's just very old, but it's gone now, and you're fine. So I had no idea what that meant. He didn't go into it. Anyway, the next day, I went from barely being able to walk to the next day I rode my bike from Hollywood to Marina Del Rey and back. So it's like 30-something miles combined. And friends in my building said, what just happened? What's going on? So that experience where I sat across from that guy was so real. Did I understand it in the moment? No. Do I understand it now? Probably much better. But it was so real that, again, it'd be the same reality of if I had a lump and a surgeon cut it out. It was that noticeable of what transferred between us. That, again, deepened my quest into this mystery of how does one do that? How does one work on someone without touching them? So when you mention things like the auric field, your energetic system, your spirit, people go into chakras, there are people that is as clear as day to. Then there's other people that want that to be as clear as day to them, but it will never be. It's just not meant for them to have any interaction with that, and that's quite fine. I think for all of us, it's like, first of all, the discernment of knowing why you want to get involved with this stuff. And is it for your highest good, and is it for the highest good of everyone on the planet? There's definitely something bigger going on. The question is, what does it stem from? And that's the mystery, and that's what every mystic has been talking about, teaching from, and trying to understand.
I'm the air you're breathing in. I'm every second that you waste. Every time you hesitate, I'm sky. I'm the memories you've made. I'm your secrets and no one knows. Every single dream that you hold close.
So for me, I want to live a life of service. Everything I do, I want to do for the betterment and wellness of others. That means I'm living, trying to be the best I can be for other people. I think when we go through life with that sort of quest, it's a very different experience than to acquire powers or whatever else one could want to do on a spiritual path.
Yeah, what you're talking about is really surrendering one's own ego to something greater than ourselves. And you mentioned your book, Mastery, which we'll mention. Yeah, Glenn has a book called Mastery. It's one of those things that I open up periodically throughout the day and just like read a phrase from it, kind of.
Yeah, it's in it. There's 240 individual mastery passages, very short, and they're meant to remind us of our true identity, awaken us to our true identity. So people often use it the way you're speaking of, where they'll just either walk by it, know to open it at a certain time, or they'll think of a page number or open at a time. And groups do that. They'll work with page numbers.
Yeah, so let's talk about mastery and the idea of the higher self, because you mentioned that how like the example of the sculpture and chipping away, which is a great analogy. The idea that we all have this higher self, so to speak, that we have this inner master, and of course these are words that get tossed around in spiritual circles, but it does have meaning, the idea of the master, of the higher self.
Well, it's two different things, but since my book is called Mastery Living the Highest You, we'll talk about it as one thing. First of all, we have to say, what is a master, right? So there's people that are masters at doing makeup. There's people that are masters at doing dentistry. There's people that are masters in athletics, right? And so basically when you've mastered something, you've become so proficient in it, you can almost do it unconsciously. It just becomes your nature. Then there's self-mastery. So everything I've talked about thus far is about self-mastery. And when we talk about chipping away at the things that no longer work for us, then we're talking about going from this person that's wrapped in a lot of ideas that may have served them up to this point in time and a lot of belief systems, and chipping away and say, that doesn't really serve me anymore. Wow, yeah, I believed that for many years, but that doesn't really serve me. And as we chip away with that, you could say that's a spiritual thing, or you could just say it's us getting healthier as human beings, who you, Matt, are as a human being on this planet and who you're here to be, rather than using the word master even, right? So, but self-mastery, self-realization, self-inquiry, all these things, body, mind, spirit, right? So can we get to know everything? Can we understand ourselves in physicality? Can we understand our mental thought process? Can we understand how our beliefs affect our reality? Can we understand that we actually have this indwelling spirit that animates us in some way, shape, or form? And can we connect to that? Can we be present to something inside us, deep within us? It's already there, but it's different for every single person on Earth. It's not about everyone becoming the same thing. It's not about everyone waking up in the same way. It's about removing all the noise and static that is around us as individuals and seeing, when that's removed, who are we? And from that place, we're connected into something bigger. Know thyself is what's been taught by every great teacher from the beginning of time. So the higher self beyond the egoic self. The egoic self views itself as separate from the whole, as a separate entity always, right? It often, or we'll say the lower self, we could say the lower self often looks outside itself for gratification, for worth. It sees, what can I get? The lower self is more, what can you do for me? The higher self is, what can I do for you? And so when Jesus or others talk about being reborn unto spirit, I don't believe it's just a passage that you're reading. I believe it's an actual spiritual transformation that you undergo. So you're no longer seeing separation. When you look at a tree, you're understanding that you are connected to that. See a flower, you feel connected. You see anything, you start to feel connected to it. Early on, you read this in books. Plenty of books that talk about the interconnectedness of all. Physics is talking about the interconnectedness of all this stuff. But then after a while, it becomes real. When you're actually experiencing it, then you cannot look at the world the way 98% of the world is looking at itself. You realize that when you drop a bomb somewhere else, you're dropping a bomb on you. Like you realize it's no more us versus them versus us. That's done. And you see everything as the oneness, the inherent oneness of everything, everyone being part of this creation.
So what kinds of experiences did you have that started to lead you out of that space of all mind and deconstructing the mind into that space of feeling interconnectedness?
A couple of things happen is when you have this place of stillness in the body, when the mind actually becomes still, right? When you quiet, when the volume has been turned down in your cells, when maybe some healing has been done, when you're actually, in a sense, you could say a clean slate, then when you look at someone, you see their true self. When you see the true self, you see the oneness. When that starts to happen, there's not really a going back. That takes a lot of unwinding of the self. It takes you willing to become born anew. And when you're born anew, then everything is quote unquote a mystical experience. It's not like, oh, at 3:00 today, this happened and it was really something. I got to write a blog about that. Everything that happens is a spiritual experience that is incredible. It's that everywhere. Everything is that. Noise can come back into my system. Fear can come back into my system, but it doesn't take home there. It doesn't root in that deep anymore. So like when someone takes a shower and they take off dirt, it's easier now for me to let these things leave me. When they come, when fear comes, fear is more of the mind, fears of the uncertainty of future. I embrace them at this point and say, okay, this is what I'm feeling now. It's not who I am. It's like Emerson has a quote where he says, I have been shown enough by the divine to trust in what I've not yet been shown by the divine. I lean into this thing that's often called God. I lean into this trust. I lean into what Emerson is talking about, the divine, in saying that I've been shown the threads that connect it all. I've been shown how someone just shows up in my life for some reason out of nowhere when I could have been thinking. I've seen enough, as Emerson would say, proof of it, that I now trust in it. As far as individual experiences or the mystical experiences, I don't chase that in any way, shape, or form. At this point, I wouldn't say I have little interest in it, but my interest is more in the everyman that's walking the street, that's trying to understand his anger or trying to pay his electric bill. If there's something that I could say that could help them, that's one thing that's very important, but it's often not saying anything to them about a mystical aspect of life. I feel there's steps. Like you asked me earlier, how did I get from this to this? It's like a big jump. And I feel one of the challenges with people who take on what you'd call a teacher role is they often are meeting people where they're at rather than where the people are at. And I think if we're to actually help people, we have to meet them where they're at. So you said earlier about the people who don't believe in chakras and stuff. And I said, well, there's no reason probably in the world that that person should believe in chakras. But what he should probably look at is self-love, kindness, the nature of his thoughts, how they may be affecting his life and the life of his children and those around him. So that to me is where I go to. That's my spirituality. Love, kindness, compassion, empathy, understanding. The mystical stuff is interesting, and it was an interesting part of my journey because it let me see, wow, there's more, and I can lean into that and trust in. I knew early on that I could never figure it out. My brain could never understand it. I knew that my heart, if anything, was the gateway in. It wasn't my mind. It was purely my heart. So my journey now has been, more so going from, like you said earlier, well, when you went from studying about bodybuilding and then you went to studying all about the mind, body, spirit, right? Was it the same tape? And I said, yeah, it was very much so. It's that guy that was devouring books, knowledge, wisdom. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think you get to a point in your life where you invite in ease, where effort has worked really well, and then you embrace effortless effort and ease and grace. And so I think that's more where I'm at in my life and operating from a place of grace and faith.
It's interesting you say that because I feel like you're kind of talking to where I'm at now. And I mean, getting to California, going on that journey, I'm a very intense person. There's a lot of energy put into activity and making things happen, chasing that ideal, that vision. And that's just something it's an amazing thing to do, to kind of be in that place of, well, I know I don't want this, and then to really create that vision of what you want and go for it. And now I'm kind of in this space of, after coming back, and for those who don't know, I've been traveling for the last 2 months and kind of went on this journey around the United States, following intuition, and it's created some mental shifts. I don't feel this need to go out, and it's been kind of tough because I really like that drive and that intensity, and it's almost like, okay, I love this piece. It almost creates this sense of not boredom, but kind of unsureness, where is this going? And I'm trying to just go in with that idea of trust, right? That maybe I can sit back and let things come to me more than I go after them. But it's very new, you know what I mean? I'm not used to this. It's tough, and I'm a Leo, so I have that mentality of create, just intensity. And so basically, I guess to turn that into a question is when you were in that state, where did you go from there?
Well, I will say one thing, that I've always felt a direction, meaning I've always felt focused on what I'm getting to. So when I was young, it was the bodybuilding. Then it was the mind, body, spirit, and along with that was a large chapter of my life revolved around screenwriting. So when I was screenwriting in Los Angeles, it was always about screenplays that I felt would elevate consciousness. But I had a focus point. So when you talk about having this energy and what do you do with it? So I would write from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. for years, and then I'd spend 3 hours during the day editing. So I was writing many hours, very odd hours, for reasons of creativity. And But that's energy. That's not passivity. I mean, I was, in a sense, you could say, very receptive. You could say a lot of my writing is free writing. It's just stream of consciousness. It just really comes. The characters come. I don't think about who the characters are, or I don't try to create characters or anything like that. But still, I'm receptive to that, and there's a tremendous amount of energy running through me when I do this type of work. And there's a tremendous amount of focus. And so you could say that when you're in the gym, you're trying to accomplish something, and you could say when you're writing a screenplay, you're trying to accomplish something, and you could say when you're trying to become peaceful, you're trying to accomplish something. And, so this idea of us always trying to get somewhere else is a very fine line between honoring our passions and what we're here to convey. So you may wake up tomorrow and be inspired to write a song, right? And so you might just sit down and it just pours through you, and that's just fantastic. And then you might say, wow, I don't know what to do with this. Like, I don't want to record this. I don't feel like going here. I don't want to do that, but you did that in the moment. So then the thing is, what do you have to do next? And this is, I think, when we can honor the moment, what I find, and I've told people over the years, if you can live, for lack of a better description, one authentic moment, one moment that seems to be deeply guided or inspired, it will lead to the next one. And I'm not necessarily saying this is a negative, but it can be challenging, is we have a world that's built on our schedules booked for 3 weeks in advance, some people many more weeks in advance. And so there's very little room for being in the moment, in the now, and allowing the now to dictate. Yeah. It's like we're basically trying to tell the universe and everything, we're in charge. This is how it's going to work. We don't really know what's around the corner, even if we plan it 6 months in advance, 3 weeks in advance. Like, I remember following bits of your journey out west, and you saying, "Oh my God, it's like snowing now. It's hot," or it's like all these things. You're like all these emotions. Like you knew the map, and you knew the road, and you knew the estimated time, but you didn't know how I was going to meet that person here. And holy cow, that's going to be really. And so being present to this, what I find, Matt, is that most people are not aware of how they move through life. So that's the biggie. I don't think people need to become aware of their energetic systems of their body, but I do think they need to become aware of their body and how they inhabit it and how they move through their day. It's really valuable to learn that you can grow and you can change and you can shift. And that can be in your own unique way. For me, the whole idea of self-mastery, of understanding thyself, there's nothing more important than that. And in that, there's a lot of surrender, right? And again, every religion, pretty much all of them, speak about surrender, trust, and faith. But we're living in a modern world where people are bombarded with information like never before. I mean, it's just the amount of input that a brain gets every day, and the amount of it being sold to people, told to people, it's pretty incredible. So anyone that can somehow break free of that, yet work within it, is doing a pretty remarkable job.
How do we achieve that self-mastery? How do we uncover those layers? I mean, a lot of people start thinking, okay, like I know something's wrong, I don't even know where to begin, or like you said, there's just so much noise. How do I know what's going to help and what's not? And then another thing is false teachers. They've had experiences where there are associations with spirituality or healing or the things that we're talking about that do help to diminish that ego self and bring us into the state of conscious awareness that you're talking about. We have experiences that make that worse. So where do we begin?
We've been given this really incredible thing called the body. And there's a saying that the tissues don't lie. So a good body worker will touch a person and feel all the tension, the traumas, the emotional blocks in the body. So I would say first begin with the very simple things of how's your breathing, right? Can you breathe into your belly? Are your breaths full or are they labored? Are they caught in your chest, or does your diaphragm fully open and expand your ribs and go into the belly? So the first is the breath. And I often tell people when lost, and I'm not just talking about lost in the woods, but when lost, situation in a store, in your mind, first return to the breath, right? So the breath, is an honored guest that should always be checked in with. So then it's this. So then we have to look for repetitive patterns, right? And you'll hear often where a man or a woman will date 5 different people, and those 5 men or 5 women are horrible. And they always tell the same story about what he or she did. But they never really say, like, why do I keep bringing that same person into my life over and over? Rather, they're looking outside themselves. So find the breath and then start looking at your habits and patterns and seeing which ones could be deemed healthy or not healthy. And what habits in life constricts you, meaning what makes your body tighter and more tense, versus what habits, patterns, and beliefs do you hold that opens you up, that opens your heart up, that opens the tissues of your body up and expands you. So say that you want to live in a more expanded state. So you could look at things like, what dream that I used to have that I've dropped? And when I dropped that dream, did my body constrict? What is it that I'm here to do? Asking the simple question, which very few people ask, what am I here to do? How can I serve life? What am I here to do? What excites me? Who am I? For me, it's always about the very basic things of the body doesn't lie. If we walk into a situation and our stomach is in knots, we have to say, like, what is happening here? Do I need to take some stuff for my stomach not to be in knots, or do I have to stop walking into situations that put my stomach in knots? Awareness, self-awareness of how we go through our day, what kind of clothes we wear, what kind of products we put on our body, what kind of foods we put into our body, how fast or slow do we chew our foods, how well do we digest our foods. Well, we digest our food often correlates directly with how well we digest our life. This is a big thing. And also realize that when you are eating, it's obvious you're taking in things you're going to digest, but realize that everything you take in, your body has to process in some way, shape, or form. So if you're someone that every night goes to sleep with the TV on, taking in all these images right up to bed, where your nervous system, your eyes, where everything is being so stimulated, and then you find yourself not sleeping well, it's generally not that you need a sleeping pill. It's more so that you need to look at the habits that you have leading up to bed. Knowing how to ground yourself, knowing how to put your feet on the earth, touch a tree, just be here now. Like Ram Dass would often tell people, can you be here now? You look at most people, and after about 30 seconds in a conversation, maybe 40 seconds, they start to check out. Stillness is not really there. So, I think we always have to ask ourselves, what brings me peace? What brings me peace?
It's funny you said that, because as soon as you said checking your phone, as you can see, I haven't checked my phone this whole conversation, and the light that I got a message went off right after you said that.
And by the way, that was me sending you a text. And then false teachers, right? So this is so challenging. There's a lot of people preying on other people in this world. In the corporate world, it's in the world of distribution of what they're trying to, what is one trying to be sold. It's how perhaps you could say the government may manipulate certain things to get people to feel a certain way, or certain television, do things to manipulate people. So this discernment is very interesting. There's certain ways to look at it. Like, for instance, we mentioned earlier this idea of spirit and you having a soul. Let's say that you are a spiritual being before a physical being. You're a spiritual being having a physical experience. This is something we often hear. We can say that if this is the case, and if one was to believe such a thing, then that person would also say that they could ask their spirit, only bring me into situations that are for my highest good and the highest good of all. So then that gets into also prayer, praying to God or your higher self or the universe that you be guided only into situations that are for your highest good or for the highest good of all. That's different than going through life in kind of a pinball machine and being at a party and someone says, oh my God, there's this great channel, you got to go see him. And everyone's like, already drinking, and all of a sudden they're in this room and they're listening to this Swami do his spiel, and then the next thing they know, they're hooked into this whole network of whatever, and they don't even know how they got there. They just ended up in this situation. And so the idea of knowing that also there's no one that will ever fill you up except yourself. But it's the higher part of you. It's the part of you that gets beyond the noise of what you've been told you're here to do, or who you thought you were, or all the smaller stuff you layered onto you, and embracing something more. And when you embrace that something more, from that also usually comes much more discernment, and you find yourself less drawn into situations where you're dealing with these false, as you would say, teachers, false prophets. There are very powerful masters that still walk the earth that can do quite a bit for you, and you have a very interesting interaction one-on-one with them, maybe even in groups, some still do it. But for the most part, it's you that fills up you.
Here's some difficulty I've had, and the thing I've been wrestling with lately is that I almost feel like the sense of peace in the moment is not as meaningful as other experiences I've had, without going into too much detail.
Just so peace isn't meaning that you're sedated, right? So I believe inspiration comes generally when peace is present. Most singer-songwriters will tell you, I got this song when I was looking into my newborn child's eyes. I got this song when I was in the shower. That's a big one. I got this song when I was driving on the open road, right? Inspiration usually comes from places of peace and a levelness in the system. What you're talking about is more, I think, the difference between doing and being. And so I think when you're inspired, of course you're then inspired into action to doing. But that's different than waking up and saying, oh my God, I got it. What am I doing? I haven't done anything. I got to do this. I got to, oh my God, I'm 27. It's July. And this whole thing spooks out. And then you say, well, then there's peace. That's the opposite of that, right? You're saying, what is this peace? What does it do? What is this? Okay, so what, right? And you mentioned masters early on in mastery. in the past, these were people that were living on ashrams, in temples. They were contemplatives. They basically built their whole life around this thing of inner peace. So they weren't going to the mall. They weren't standing in line at DMV. A lot of them weren't ever thinking about paying rent or anything like that. They were just living this life. And so you are, in a sense, living the life of like a modern mystic, an urban yogi, or something, something along those lines. And finding that balance will always be a bit of a challenge, I'm sure. And so that's when you look for other people who are similar to you, that have similar interests, and create a community. And I think, like every great teacher will tell you, when we're in the now, if we can really be present in the now, then all the stuff is there. Like, all of it is there. Not just parts of it is there. All of it is there. And like we said earlier, like, you can connect one truly lived moment to the next and the next and the next. All of a sudden, a day goes by, a week goes by, and you feel really good about yourself. And because you feel like, yeah, I'm aligning with what I'm here to do. This is who I am. This is my authentic self. That's nothing to do with this other person or that other person or that yogi or that saint, other than that they followed their call. And that's the similarities. They followed their call, and I'm following my call. It's our story. As a writer, I look at most of life as we're all in story. And we're all playing a part in this story.
How do you think one knows when it's time to teach, to share wisdom?
How do you know when you're ready to be kind? How do you know when you're ready to be compassionate? How do you know when you're ready to have self-love? How do you know when you're ready to sit for a half hour and just contemplate peace? We can talk about all the big stuff, right? The mystical, the miracles and all that. But for me, I'm about these very basic things. Kindness, compassion, empathy, understanding, self-love, connection to our core essence. How do you do it? Well, when you're at a checkout at a store and you see that someone is frazzled in front of you and has 3 kids pulling out their leg and dropping, and they can't find the correct change, instead of going off or getting a reaction or adding to that situation in what one could do as a negative way, you're kind. You just were a spiritual teacher. We're just using the word spiritual. But you've just been a spiritual teacher in a very high level. In some ways, you couldn't be a higher level spiritual teacher than being kind in that type of moment. So when you can do these things, you are a master. If you can walk through life like that and become an incredible listener, be present to another human being in front of you, and totally dwell more and more within the peace within yourself, you're teaching. And you're not calling, you're not sending out flyers, not doing it, you're walking through life. I think there's this idea of being a teacher, like a swami, like a master. This is like high level stuff. Or knowing that you're never not a teacher. Everything you do is affecting everyone that comes in contact with you. The way you accept a compliment, you're a teacher. The way you give a compliment, you're a teacher. Like, you can never not be a teacher, and you can never not be a student.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. That was my conversation with Glenn Berkenkamp. If you want to find out more about Glenn, you can go to livingthehighestyou.com and you can get his book Mastery, Living the Highest You. Just use the coupon code Conscious Vibe and you'll get free shipping and a signed copy. Yeah, find us on Facebook. Just search for The Conscious Vibe, or join our Facebook group, The Conscious Vibe Tribe. Thanks for listening, everyone. I don't like to ask for much, but if you really want to help out, just give us a rating on iTunes or share it, like it on SoundCloud, YouTube, do whatever you can, and I really appreciate that. Thanks for listening, guys.